Well, good afternoon, everybody. I am Stefan Fassbinder from the German Copper Institute, the German branch of ECI, the European Copper Institute, and I'm in charge of all electrical applications of copper here. Well, I'm going to present to you today the findings of our US colleagues who have had some tests carried out to measure the efficiencies of different types of electric motor. It is commonly perceived that synchronous motors with permanent magnets have a higher efficiency, particularly at the part load, than the commonplace induction motors, the asynchronous motors, which are commonly used. But sometimes when you come across some publications regarding this, then you start to wonder. Here, for instance, sorry, that's very awkward language, I admit. Let me translate as far as necessary. It says here, among others, the disadvantage of the three-phase induction motor is its efficiency decreasing by 1 order of magnitude at part load against the permanent magnet synchronous motor. Now, 1 order of magnitude, whatever may be meant by that. But, well, when you look at the plot here, that is shown here in a magazine, in an electrical magazine, first of all, it shows us that an IE4 motor has a better efficiency than an IE3 motor, which does not come as an utmost surprise, I think. And I'm still searching for the order of magnitude in between. Well, I addressed the publisher regarding this. Here, it said again that, well, in effect, this plot tells us that an IE5 motor has a better efficiency than an IE4 motor, which again does not come as too great a surprise to me. After all, the differences are very small, since even moderately efficient motors already have rather high efficiencies. Apart from that, IE4, the I5, the efficiency class IE5 does not yet exist. It exists only as a draft. Now, the publication proceeds further and compares 2 types of motors here, 2 motors each, one with 15 kilowatts and one with 75 kilowatts, 2 15 kilowatt motors with permanent magnets, and 2 75 kilowatt motors with permanent magnets, and with compares them to 2 motors, induction motors, asynchronous motors, which are the commonly used types of motors nowadays. And it says there that at half load, the efficiency of an induction motor drops from 96.2% to 96.0% on the 75 kilowatt motor, or from 93.9% to 93.3% on the 30 kilowatt motors, respectively. Well, and on the induction motors, at half load, the efficiency drops from 93.3 to 93.1% on a 30 kilowatt motors. Well, this is not so much of a difference, I think, and it is always mentioned in each case where the results are presented, which type of inverter is used, but it is not mentioned whether the inverter is also measured or whether the measurement takes place at the output terminals of the inverter. I addressed the author the publisher, first of all, regarding this, and they submitted my request to the author, but the author was reluctant to reply due to time issues, as he said. And the editor felt a bit embarrassed about this and said, well, we are afraid this will peter out open-ended, and that is exactly what happened. There was no further response, or let alone the discussion. Now, the question always is, what really is Partload? Is that high speed at low torque, or is it low speed at high torque, or low speed at low torque? It always depends. You have to be clear about what you're talking about. And the argument that is usually brought forward for the permanent magnet motor is that the synchronous motors do not require any additional energy for exciting the magnetic field. But, well, when you run a motor with permanent magnets at high speed and low torque, then it is overexcited, several times overexcited, and then rather than building up a magnetic field, you need to weaken the field that you have because it is too strong. Now, this isn't any better than having to build up the magnetic field always at the very exact force that you need. So our US colleagues wanted to know exactly what we are at and submitted a test. My colleague Richard Dufay did that, who unfortunately cannot give this presentation himself because he is no longer with our association. And this is what they set out to test. They had two sets of motors, 3.7, 5.5, 7.5, and 15 kilowatts. And of these, they had 3 with permanent magnets and 1 asynchronous motor with a cast copper rotor, squirrel cage rotor. Now the question is which inverter to use, because the motors need to be operated via frequency inverters. The permanent magnet motors won't start on the line directly anyway, and if you want to vary the speed, you always need a frequency inverter. So they decided to procure a frequency inverter for the synchronous motors as recommended by the respective manufacturer of the motor, and for the asynchronous motor they selected an inverter that was declared as suitable for an asynchronous motor with a copper squirrel cage. And then they measured the overall efficiency of the system. That means they measured the input power at the input terminals of the inverter, because that is what really interests the consumer. But the difficulties already started before they could even start measuring, because it turned out that the copper rotor motors were easily procured within a few days off the shelf, but the permanent magnet motors had long lead times, 10 days, 1 14 weeks, 1 18 weeks. And this delayed the measurement, of course. And is a handicap to the proliferation of permanent magnet motors. Well, but here we go. Here we have the measuring results. Let's take the 3.7 kilowatt motor first. It is measured here at 25% torque. And you see, yes, there is a clear advantage for the permanent magnet motor. It has a better efficiency. But when you measure the copper rotor motor with 2 different inverters, then the difference between the 2 inverters is even greater than the difference between the different types of motors that are measured here. Now let's increase the torque, 50% rated value. Then the differences more or less level out, but are still somewhat clear. Let's go up to 75% torque. Speed up again. Well, it is quite obvious that in this case, the permanent magnet does provide a certain advantage in efficiency. The efficiency values are somewhat better. Let's go to 100% torque. Yeah, now it becomes clear. The permanent magnet motor has a better efficiency, but we are no longer in the Partload range here. Let's go with up to 110% torque. Nothing much changes anymore. Right, next motor, 5.5 kilowatts. We start with 25% torque again, and here you see the inverse happens. Red lines, that means the copper rotor tested with 3 different inverters performs better throughout than the permanent magnet, which was also measured. These are 3 different motors measured with 3 different inverters. And all of them fall behind the copper rotor with whatever inverter you use. Let's go up, 50% torque. The results more or less level out, and the assemblies are nearly equal now. Let's go to 75% torque. Yeah, again you see that the selection of inverter matters more than the selection of motor type. Go to 1% torque. Yeah, the plots approximate to each other and somewhat level out. Let's have a look at the one. 10%, practically the same. Next motor, 7.5 kilowatts, 25% torque, and this time the permanent magnet is better again, but again we see that the selection of the inverter makes a greater difference than the selection of magnet or an asynchronous motor. Let's go to 50% torque. Yeah, more or less leveled out. 75%. Yeah, they are nearly equal. Let's go to 100%. Yeah, in this case, they are nearly the same. Here at low speed, the copper rotor is somewhat better, and at high speed, the permanent magnet is somewhat better. The other way around than you would have expected. Now let's go up to 110% rated torque. Oh, nearly the same. Next motor, 15 kilowatts. And here again you see 25% torque, that 2 of the assemblies, the combinations of synchronous motor with respective inverters perform very good, and 1 not so good, nothing much better than the copper rotor ones. Let's go to percent torque. Now the curves are approximating each other again. Go to 75%. Hardly any more difference here. go to 100%. Yeah, they're nearly the same. There is one combination of a permanent magnet synchronous motor with an inverter which performs clearly better than the others, but all the others are more or less the same. You may notice here that there are still 6 plots listed in the legend, but you find only 5 lines. This is because one of the inverters failed to perform 100% torque. Let's go to 110%. You will see only 4 lines because a second inverter also failed. We should have 3 tests with copper rotors and 3 tests with permanent magnets here, but we have only 2 and 2. Because one inverter in each case failed to perform 110% torque. Well, this already brings me to the end. Let's look at the balance and the essence of it all. It is really more or less a tit for tat to use permanent magnet synchronous motors instead of induction motors for reasons of efficiency. You see here the power loss, the differences in power loss listed for the different combinations that were used here. The prices of the motors here on the left is motor price here, and it says here mean. Mean means that because we have 3 different types of motors with permanent magnets, I used only a mean price of these 3 here, rather than filling in the 3 prices here, because that might have been too many figures. Then you see the power loss here, the difference in power loss between the permanent magnet and the copper rotor for each of the torque categories were tested. This one, this one, this one, and then a payback time calculated for that. And of course, in cases where the copper rotor motor, which is cheaper, has better efficiency, then the payback time in theory is negative. And this is where the figures are red. The red figures are tests which showed that in these cases the copper rotor had a better efficiency than the permanent magnet. So it really remains to be considered from case to case whether a permanent magnet motor really has better efficiency. It depends very much on the inverter that is used. Well, this already brings me to the end of this set of measurements which our US colleagues gratefully and fortunately performed. And it shows quite clearly that also the copper rotor asynchronous motor facilitates to design motors fulfilling efficiency class IE4, and it can be built smaller than the aluminum rotor motor, and it is just as robust and as approximately as inexpensive as the old aluminum motor, and therefore can very well compete with synchronous motors with permanent magnets. It is a common habit, but it is unfair that when presenting new techniques and technologies, you always pick out the best example from the new technology and compare it to an average or mediocre example from the existing technology, and then you see, you say, well, you see, the new technology is better. This is a common practice, but it's not good practice, and really, when you use the best, the cutting edge model of the one, then you should compare it to the cutting edge model of the other technique, or use an average in each case. But making such comparisons, as it is often done, does not lead to a fair competition and to optimal purchasing decision. So this remains to be considered when deciding about procurement of new motors and drives. Thank you very much. And I'm still available here for your questions and comments.